Hey there, fellow deep divers. Ready to tackle self-sabotage? We're diving deep into Brianna Wiest's book, The Mountain Is You, to explore why we get in our own way.
It's interesting how Weist approaches this whole idea. It's not about beating ourselves up for self-sabotaging. She actually frames it as a protection mechanism, like our subconscious is trying to keep us safe.
So it's less about being our own worst enemy and more like having a bodyguard who's maybe a little too enthusiastic about their job.
Yeah, exactly. It's like she's saying our subconscious is looking out for us, but sometimes it goes a little overboard. She uses this great example from Carl Jung.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. He was the famous psychologist, right?
Right. So as a kid, Jung would faint to avoid going to school. It seemed like a random ailment. But Weiss suggests it was actually his subconscious trying to protect him from a place that made him unhappy.
Wow. That makes you wonder how many times we do things that seem totally irrational, but there's actually a deeper motivation we're not even aware of.
Exactly. It's like our subconscious is speaking a different language.
So how do we start to decode those messages? I mean, how do we even recognize self-sabotage in the first place?
Well, it starts with understanding the why behind our actions. What are those deeper fears or unmet needs that are driving this behavior? Wyeth digs into some of those root causes, and some of them are pretty surprising.
Like what?
Well, she talks about irrational fear, for example.
I can see how fear would hold us back, but irrational fear.
Yeah, it's like we fixate on certain anxieties that seem safe to worry about, but those worries might be distracting us from the real deeper fears that are lurking beneath the surface.
Like that example Wiest gives about the person who's terrified of being a passenger in a car.
Right. It might not actually be about the car itself. It could be a deeper fear of losing control, but that feels too scary to face head on.
So we displace that fear onto something more concrete and manageable, like being in a car.
Exactly. It's like our subconscious is trying to steer us away from a perceived danger zone, even if that danger isn't really what we think it is.
And speaking of steering, Wiest talks about another roadblock, limiting beliefs.
Ah, yes. Those pesky beliefs we pick up along the way. They can really hold us back.
It's like those beliefs become these invisible walls that we keep bumping into.
Exactly. Weiss gives a classic example. Someone who believes all rich people are terrible. That belief might lead them to unconsciously resist financial abundance, even if they consciously want it.
So even if we think we're chasing a goal, our subconscious might be working against us based on these beliefs we've internalized.
That's the tricky part. We have to become aware of those limiting beliefs so we can challenge them and replace them with ones that actually support our growth.
And there's another one that really struck me. Our discomfort with the unfamiliar. It's like, even if something could be good for us, we resist it because it's unknown.
It's that natural human tendency to cling to what's familiar, even if it's no longer serving us. Wiest brings up Gay Hendricks' concept of the upper limit. It's essentially our tolerance for happiness. We all have this internal thermostat set for a certain level of happiness, and when we exceed that limit, we tend to self-sabotage to bring ourselves back down to our usual comfort zone.
It's like we're afraid of good things happening. Like, wait, this is too good. Something bad must be about to happen.
It can feel that way. And that's why it's so important to become aware of our upper limit and consciously choose to expand it. We can learn to embrace greater levels of happiness and success without feeling the need to sabotage ourselves.
So it's not about denying the comfort zone exists. It's about gently nudging those boundaries a little further. And Wiest also delves into this fascinating idea of core needs and commitments.
Yeah, that was a really insightful part of the book. She talks about how we all have these fundamental needs like trust, autonomy, connection. When those needs aren't met, we develop coping mechanisms. She calls these core commitments, and they're things like the need for control or the need for freedom.
And those commitments can actually become self-sabotaging if they get too rigid, right?
Exactly. The stronger the unmet need, the stronger those coping mechanisms, those core commitments have on us. It becomes a vicious cycle.
So it's not just about identifying the self-sabotaging behaviors. It's about understanding the unmet needs that might be fueling those behaviors.
Absolutely. That's where the real work begins.
Okay, so let's get into some specific behaviors that many of us struggle with. Procrastination, anyone. I know I've been there.
Yeah.
Wiest's take on procrastination is pretty eye-opening, though. She says it's not just laziness.
Yeah, it's deeper than that. She argues that procrastination is often fear disguised as busyness, meaning we put things off because we're afraid of facing the potential consequences of taking action.
It's like we tell ourselves, I'm just so busy right now. But deep down, it's the fear of failure or rejection or even success that's holding us back.
Exactly. And instead of beating ourselves up for procrastinating, Wiest suggests we need to shift our approach. We need to address the underlying fear head-on and reconnect to the inspiration behind our goals.
So it's not about powering through it. It's about understanding the root of the problem and finding ways to move forward with courage.
Now, another common form of self-sabotage is perfectionism. This one can be tricky because it often masquerades as a positive trait.
Oh yeah, we're often praised for being perfectionists. But it sounds like that can be a trap too.
It can be. Wiest explains how perfectionism can lead to avoidance. We become so afraid of vulnerability and failure that we end up avoiding the work altogether.
It's like that paralysis by analysis thing.
Exactly. We get so caught up in doing everything perfectly that we never even get started.
So how do we break free from that trap?
Wiest's solution is pretty simple. Focus on progress, not perfection. It's about taking action, even if it's messy or imperfect. Just do it, then refine later.
Done is better than perfect.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about another behavior that can really trip us up, especially those of us who are naturally empathetic and giving, people-pleasing. Oof. I think we've all been there.
Oh, people-pleasing. It's exhausting, isn't it?
It really is. It's like this constant need to seek approval from others, even if it means sacrificing our own needs and values.
It can be. And Wiest traces this back to a need for external validation. We become so focused on making others happy that we lose sight of what truly matters to us.
So how do we break free from that pattern?
Wiest suggests we start by building self-love.
It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but I think I get it. If we love ourselves more, we're less dependent on that external validation.
Exactly. It's about learning to love ourselves first so that we can love others from a place of wholeness, not neediness.
Now, there's another sneaky form of self-sabotage that Wiest talks about. Pride. It's something that's often celebrated in our culture, but she points out how it can also keep us stuck.
Pride can definitely be a double-edged sword.
Like, we might stay in a dead-end job or an unhealthy relationship because we're too proud to admit we made a mistake or ask for help.
It's that ego trap. It whispers, "You've invested too much in this, you can't back down now."
But holding on to something out of pride often costs us more in the long run, doesn't it?
It often does. It's about being willing to say, "I made a mistake," or "I need help," even if it bruises our ego a bit.
Which is never easy.
Yeah.
But it sounds like embracing that vulnerability is key to breaking free from those self-sabotaging patterns. Well, we've certainly unmasked some of the common culprits of self-sabotage.
We have.
I'm really curious to hear more about what we can do about it.
Me too. So, a lot of people think letting go has to be this big dramatic thing, but Wiest has a different take on it. She says you can't really force yourself to let go.
Yeah, it's like trying to force yourself to fall asleep.
Exactly. The harder you try, the more elusive it becomes. So instead of trying to suppress the past, Wiest says the key is to create a present and future that are so fulfilling that the past just naturally fades away.
So it's not about erasing the past. It's more like creating something so compelling in the present that you just naturally forget about the old stuff.
Right. It's about building a new life, a new you that's so amazing you don't even think about the past anymore. And part of that is letting go of those unrealistic expectations we often put on ourselves.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be imperfect, right?
Exactly. Life is messy and unpredictable. Things rarely go according to plan. Wiest also talks about the importance of focusing on our own approval.
Oh yeah, that's huge. Instead of constantly seeking validation from others.
It's so easy to get caught up in what other people think, but at the end of the day, our own self-worth should come from within.
Now, Wiest also makes this interesting distinction between healing our minds and healing our bodies.
Yeah. She says that healing our minds is not about going back to who we were before, but becoming someone completely new.
Okay, so it's not about erasing the past, but integrating it into who we are now.
Right. And that often means facing those repressed emotions that we've been trying to bury.
Yeah, have you ever noticed how trying to ignore uncomfortable emotions just makes them even stronger?
Oh, absolutely. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can only keep it down for so long before it pops back up with even more force.
So what's the alternative?
Wiest encourages us to actually lean into the discomfort, to let ourselves feel the full range of our emotions without judgment.
It's like giving ourselves permission to feel it all.
Exactly. Creating that space for emotions to move through us rather than getting stuck.
Now, speaking of space, Wiest talks about this concept of inner peace.
Inner peace, yes. It's not about pretending everything's perfect.
Right. It's more like this deep down knowing that everything is okay.
And that it always will be. It's about having that trust and resilience, knowing that we have the inner strength to handle whatever comes our way.
But finding that inner peace can feel so elusive sometimes, especially when our minds are just racing with worries and fears. Wiest explores this idea of the inner child and how it plays a role in our search for peace.
Yeah, the inner child, that part of us shaped by our early experiences, it can sometimes drive us away from that peaceful feeling.
I never really thought about it that way. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Many of our fears and insecurities come from those early experiences.
It's like those early imprints create patterns that keep showing up in our adult lives.
So it's not about blaming our past or our parents or anything like that. It's about understanding how those experiences shaped us so we can start to create new patterns.
Exactly. And Wiest argues that finding peace means facing those uncomfortable feelings and choosing a different path.
Which is often the harder path. But that's where real growth happens.
Right. It's about trusting that feeling of peace more than we trust the voice of fear.
Okay, so now for one of the most impactful concepts in Wiest's book, at least for me, it's this idea of principles.
Principles, yes. So powerful, right?
She argues that principles are more effective than fleeting inspiration.
Because they actually create consistent results in our lives.
It's like the difference between a sugar rush and a nourishing meal. Inspiration can give us this quick burst of energy, but principles are like that steady fuel that keeps us going.
It's that foundational stuff, those core truths that guide our actions.
And Wiest suggests that we identify our values, those things that are most important to us, and then use those to build our personal principles.
It's about getting clear on what matters most to you and letting that guide your choices. So, for example, if you really value financial freedom, a core principle might be to always live below your means.
Right. Or if healthy relationships are a top priority, a core principle might be to communicate honestly and openly, even when it's hard.
It's about creating that internal framework for decision-making that helps you stay on track, even when you're faced with tough choices or distractions.
I love that visual. Those principles are like this inner compass that keeps pointing us in the right direction. Now, Wiest also asks some really thought-provoking questions that get us thinking about what we really want out of life.
Oh, love those.
One that really stuck with me was, if social media didn't exist, what would you do with your life?
Such a powerful question. It strips away all those external distractions.
And it forces us to really connect with those deeper desires and passions that might be getting buried under the weight of all the online noise.
It's about defining success on your own terms. It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling to you.
Now, another topic that Wiest delves into is emotional validation. She talks about how important it is, both for ourselves and for others.
Yes. It's about acknowledging and accepting our feelings, even the uncomfortable ones.
Which is often the hardest part. Our culture tends to encourage us to just suppress those so-called negative emotions.
But the thing is, all emotions are valid. They all serve a purpose.
And it's not about dwelling in negativity. It's about allowing ourselves to feel those emotions fully so we can move through them and learn from them.
It's about creating that space of compassion and understanding for ourselves and for others.
So instead of judging ourselves or others for feeling a certain way, it's about saying, hey, it's okay to feel this. It's part of being human.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of courage sometimes, but it's essential for our mental and emotional well-being.
Now, Wiest also offers some really practical advice for developing mental strength. One of them is learning to trust ourselves again.
Trusting ourselves. Ah, yes, that's so important, but it can be really hard.
Especially if we've been through experiences that have eroded that trust, like trauma or betrayal.
It can leave us feeling hesitant to trust our own judgment or intuition.
But trusting ourselves is essential for making those empowered choices that create a life that feels good.
It's about tapping into that inner knowing, that gut feeling, that often guides us in the right direction, even when logic or external influences are telling us to do something else.
Now, Wiest also emphasizes the importance of learning how to process those complex emotions.
Because we're not meant to feel happy all the time.
Right. Life is full of ups and downs. It's about developing that emotional intelligence to navigate the full range of human experience without getting swept away by the waves.
It's about recognizing that our emotions are valid, but they don't have to control us.
Now, one really practical tip that Wiest offers is to simply talk things out.
Oh, it's such a good one.
Whether it's with a therapist, a friend, or even just ourselves.
Putting words to those feelings.
Exactly. Expressing those emotions verbally can help us gain so much clarity, release some of that emotional baggage, and just move forward with more ease.
And it's a reminder that we don't have to go through it alone.
Now, Wiest also reminds us that growth is a process. It's not something that happens overnight.
It's those small, consistent steps taken over time that create lasting change.
It's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself, trust the process, and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Now, one of the things that really stood out to me in this section was Wiest's insight about stopping trying to assert dominance in our relationships.
Oh, that's such a powerful one, especially in today's world. There's so much emphasis on competition and being right.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in our closest relationships. But it sounds like that need to be right or in control can actually create distance in our connections with others.
It can. It creates resentment and power struggles, which really erode that foundation of trust and intimacy that healthy relationships are built on.
So how do we shift out of that dynamic?
Wiest encourages us to embrace equality and see our relationships as opportunities for mutual growth and support.
It's about shifting from a win-lose mentality to a win-win approach, where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected.
Exactly. Now, another piece of advice that resonated with me was to see those challenging times as opportunities for transformation.
Ooh, that's good. It's about looking for the lessons and the growth even amidst the difficulty.
It's so easy to get caught up in the negativity of a tough situation. But Wiest reminds us that there's always an opportunity to learn and become stronger.
It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right. It's about asking ourselves, what can I learn from this experience?
How can I use it to become more resilient, more compassionate, more wise?
Exactly. Now, I know we talked about this earlier, but Wiest also emphasizes the importance of scheduling time for play.
Yes, that's one I need to work on for sure. It's so easy to get caught up in the seriousness of adulting that we forget to have fun.
We forget how to just let loose and be silly and creative.
Wiest reminds us to tap into those things we enjoyed as children and make space for joy and lightheartedness in our lives.
What are some things you loved to do as a kid that you could bring back into your life now?
That's such a good question for all of us to ponder. Now, to wrap up this section, Wiest leaves us with this powerful message about becoming a master of ourselves.
Oh, yes.
She challenges us to take radical responsibility for our lives, for our choices, for our experiences.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to shape our own realities.
It's about shifting out of victim mode and stepping into our power as creators.
And she reminds us that this journey of self-mastery is a lifelong process. There will be ups and downs, triumphs and setbacks.
But the reward is a life filled with meaning, purpose, and that deep inner peace we were talking about.
She leaves us with these beautiful words of wisdom. Humble yourself because it's not all about you.
It's a reminder to let go of that ego and embrace humility, recognizing that we're all interconnected and that true fulfillment comes from contributing to something larger than ourselves. Wow, The Mountain Is You really is packed with so much great stuff. I feel like Brianna Wiest just shines a light on all those subconscious patterns that are kind of running the show behind the scenes. What parts resonated most with you?
You know, for me, it was Weiss's emphasis on personal responsibility. We have more power than we realize to break free from self-sabotage.
It's so easy to get caught up in blaming other people or circumstances for our problems. But it's empowering to remember that we can actually choose a different path.
Exactly. We're not helpless victims. We have the power to make choices that align with our values and goals. And one of the most practical tools Wiest offers is this idea of microshifts.
Microshifts.
Yeah, it's about making those small, consistent changes in our behavior instead of trying to overhaul our entire lives overnight.
Okay, so it's like taking baby steps instead of trying to make a giant leap.
Exactly. It feels a lot less overwhelming, and those small changes can add up to big results over time.
Takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be perfect or do everything perfectly right away.
Yeah.
And speaking of letting go of perfection, I love Wiest's emphasis on embracing imperfection. It's so refreshing.
It is. Especially in a world that's obsessed with presenting this perfect image all the time. It's like she's giving us permission to just be ourselves, flaws and all.
And that's where the real freedom lies, isn't it? It's in letting go of that need to be perfect and just enjoying the journey. Now, another thing that really stood out to me was Wiest's emphasis on trusting our instincts.
Oh, yes. Our instincts are such a powerful guide, but sometimes it's hard to hear that inner voice over all the other noise.
It's like our gut is trying to tell us something, but we're not always sure how to interpret those signals.
Right. And it can be hard to distinguish between our instincts and our fears sometimes.
So how do we know which voice to listen to?
Well, Weist has this great way of describing it. She says our instincts are often subtle and quiet, like a gentle nudge in the right direction.
Okay, I can see that.
While fear tends to be much louder and more attention-grabbing, like a blaring alarm,
So it's about learning to tune in to those quieter signals.
and trusting that inner compass, even when it leads us off the beaten path.
Because sometimes that path less traveled is exactly where we need to be to discover our true selves. Now, one of my favorite takeaways from the book is Weist's focus on developing our own personal principles.
Principles, yes. Those are so important for creating those consistent results in our lives.
It's like having that internal compass, that unwavering framework for making choices that actually align with our values.
And they help us stay grounded and focused, even when we're surrounded by distractions or faced with tough choices.
It's like there are guiding stars, those principles, and I love how Wiest encourages us to define our own version of success.
Yes. Forget about those external measures of success like likes and followers and all that. It's about creating a life that feels meaningful and fulfilling to you, regardless of what anyone else thinks.
And another important topic that Wiest addresses is emotional validation. It's something we don't talk about enough, but it's so crucial for our well-being, both individually and in our relationships.
It's about creating that space where it's okay to feel the full range of human emotions without judgment or shame.
It's about acknowledging and accepting our feelings and the feelings of others.
And it's not about agreeing with someone's feelings, it's just about recognizing that it's okay for them to feel the way they do.
It's about creating that safe space for authenticity and vulnerability. So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Mountain Is You, I'd love to hear your final thoughts. What key takeaways are you walking away with today?
I think one of the most powerful messages is that we're all capable of incredible growth and transformation. Self-sabotage might be a part of the human experience, but it doesn't have to define us.
It's about recognizing those patterns, understanding the why behind them, and then choosing a different path. And it all starts with that first step, that willingness to look inward and embrace the journey of self-discovery.
And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs along the way. Be patient with yourself, celebrate the small wins, and keep climbing your own mountain.
Beautifully said. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into The Mountain Is You. If you're ready to start tackling self-sabotage in your own life, we encourage you to pick up a copy of Brianna Wiest's book. It's full of insights and strategies that can help you break free from those limiting patterns and create a life that truly lights you up. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.